Hi there, Nina Matei here with a critique of the Haymarket Square bombing in Chicago in May 4th of 1886. So Valslick and Tracy in 2013 present the case study in 6 stages because it really includes 3 related incidents. A workers' rally on May 1st, a fight between workers and strikers on May 3rd where police kill 4 people and wound several other men, and then a peaceful rally on May 4th at the Haymarket Square, which ends in a bombing and a melee. So I selected the case study to learn more about civil unrest in the 1800s, and my largest critique is that the case study presents the events without context. In fact, labor solidarity had clashed with business interests for more than a decade, in a struggle between radical organizers, thugs hired to break strikes, and police meting out street justice. And actually, in the summer of 1884, planning had begun for nationwide rallies that were to be held on May 1st of 1886 in favor of an 8-hour workday for industrial workers. So my second major critique is that the case study presents only a few proactive recommendations for police and city officials, and it overlays modern policing tactics with a very different outlook for policekeeping in the 1800s. So the Illinois Historical Society in 2010 explains that the federal government had passed an 8-hour workday in 1867 for federal workers, but they had failed to enforce the law, and actually workers in Illinois were forced to sign waivers if they wanted to work. So planning for the May 1st, 1886 rallies actually began in the summer of 1884 with the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions that called for the movement for the 8-hour workday. To build momentum, surveys were sent to businesses about shorter hours, songs were written, slogans and posters were everywhere. And even though the 8-hour day wouldn't really solve all the problems between labor and management, the idea caught on across the country. Chicago's rally attracted 80,000 workers with an especially strong showing by the building trades. Chicago's already strong union movement had attracted the largest turnout in the nation, with workers marching arm in arm and carrying union banners up Michigan area, according to the Encyclopedia of Chicago History in 2005. So also, as reported by a CBS affiliate in Chicago on April 24th, 2011, those crowds on May 1st, 1886, they had traveled to lots of different workplaces. They were urging strikes in favor of the 8-hour day. And then the rallies kind of picked up steam. More participants joined in as the rallies went along. Some of the employees were shocked by the turnout and feared for a revolution. And then many businesses hastily signed agreements for shorter work hours at the same pay, according to the Encyclopedia of Chicago History. But one nationwide day of rallies was only a midpoint in the long march to fair labor in America. Agitation for the 8-hour workday continued across the world well into the 20th century, with several provisions for U.S. government workers being enacted, and finally the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1937 that covered most workers, and that's according to the Encyclopedia of Chicago History as well. As the Chicago Historical Society explains, workers and police clashed several times across the city between May 1st and May 3rd. What's become known as the Haymarket Affair really actually began on May 3rd, 1886, when police allegedly fired into the crowd, striking workers at the McCormick Reaper Works, where there was a strike, and then strike breakers were fighting. 4 people were killed and several men were wounded. The following evening, anarchist and socialist labor leaders organized a meeting for working men near Chicago's Haymarket Square. The speakers at that meeting denounced the police attacks of the previous afternoon, urged workers to intensify their struggle for the 8-hour workday, and then other improvements to labor conditions. And that's reported by the Chicago Historical Society in 2015. So, as reported by the CBS affiliate in 2011, a crowd of about 1,500 people gathered at the Haymarket at Des Moines and Randolph Streets. And the gathering included speakers who were pretty radical and anarchists. It was initially a pretty peaceful night. A light rain was falling, the crowd was dwindling to about 600 people. But the mood became confrontational when the police showed up to disperse the crowd. And that's according to the New York Times on May 6, 1886. So this is a quote from the New York Times. Just as the meeting was breaking up, the police, led by Captain William Ward and Inspector John Bonfield, arrived on the scene and attempted to disperse the crowd. During this effort, someone threw a dynamite bomb into the ranks of the police. A melee ensued, and the police and probably others in the crowd fire shots. That's the end of that quote. And according to the newspaper accounts, policemen fired their revolvers for a full 2 minutes. The New York Times account goes on to say, the situation was appalling in the extreme. The ground was covered with bodies of men writhing in agony and apparently dying. So what we know happened is that one officer was killed outright, 6 others were mortally wounded, 1 died of his wounds several years later. Another 60 were wounded, 4 civilians were killed. How many casualties the workers sustained that evening is not known, because those who fell were quickly dragged to safety or to the medical attention of their comrades. And that's the Chicago Historical Society saying that. So it's unknown really how many people truly died from the bomb, gunshots, the chaos, or friendly fire. So in all, 31 people were indicted and 8 stood trial. All were anarchist labor activists. No one was ever convicted of the bombing. 4 organizers were hanged. 3 served jail time for other charges, and then 1 actually committed suicide the day before the hanging. Police commissioner was later convicted of bribery, according to Valsic and Tracy. It was never learned exactly who threw the bomb, but outrage erupted across the city, and in the nation's newspapers, they editorialized about the anarchist conspiracy, and police took hundreds of people into custody, and that's the CBS affiliate reporting that in 2011. So, lessons learned. What I did with this is sort of went back and forth and looked at what were the things that went wrong. So what I did here is I went back and forth and I looked at what are the things that went wrong on each of those days, and then what were some of the lessons learned. So on May 1st, those rallies, they were really pretty large, 80,000 people, but they were really pretty peaceful. There was some confrontation. On the lessons learned side, there was 2 years worth of time to plan for those. And I think that, you know, if we're overlaying modern planning tactics, then law enforcement and the municipal officials have a lot of time to work with the organizers of those rallies. Back over on the What Went Wrong column on May 3rd at the McCormick incident, it began with violence. You know, the strikers and the strikebreakers were fighting. It was exacerbated, of course, by the police shooting. Back over on the lessons learned side, the crisis and risk communications is a huge part of that response. They need to, you know, rapidly frame the response, ensure people that an investigation is happening, call for accountability, make sure that it's not spreading. They have a lot of work to do in the aftermath of that sort of an incident. Back over on the What Went Wrong side, on May 4th at the Haymarket rally, it was really a much smaller rally than had been planned. Light rain, it was breaking up, the mood shifted, and then the bomb exploded. So I think, you know, over on the lessons learned, you know, how do you make sense out of that sort of a chaotic incident? There could have been friendly fire. We have no idea how many of the deaths and injuries were caused by which side of the crowd. But what it seems to me is that some better crowd control and monitoring plans, better plans for dispersing without force, and then also procedures to hold fire. And then overall, you know, the challenges is that some of these rallies are peaceful, some are protests, some are outright fights, and then some end up in melees. And you know, on the lessons learned side, it takes a lot of planning, a lot of training, a lot of exercises, and a lot of forethought to have really truly effective situation-specific resources, tactics, procedures, and response. Valsic and Tracy talk a lot about having resources, about having enough police officers, having enough riot control and fire hoses to try to disperse the crowd. But if we're overlaying modern tactics onto the 1800s, I think a lot of that is the successes that we saw in the Republican National Convention down in Tampa, where there was an enormous amount of resources, but there was an enormous amount of bridge building. And so these are some of the resources that I used in constructing the case study. I really enjoyed learning more about the Haymarket Affair, and I hope you enjoyed the case study. I hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.